Hello again, and welcome to a financial thought leadership podcast, Banking on Experience, sponsored by CRMNEXT, the banking CRM, where we simplify work, drive growth, and deliver on experience. This podcast is meant to empower individuals working in the financial industry with stories, experiences, and knowledge straight from the source. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for an awesome show. Thank you for joining another episode of Banking on Experience. I'm your host, James Gilbert. Today, we are joined by Michelle Peterson. She is the Chief Member Experience Officer at A+ Federal Credit Union. Michelle has a lot of experience in the financial services industry. She's been here for 20 plus years. She's also worked in several different credit unions across the nation, so she has a very unique perspective on cultures as it pertains to regions and other areas. We are going to be talking about why the command and control leadership is old news. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here.
Michelle has this unique ability, I think, to light up a room with her smile. And I love it. Every time we've ever met with Michelle, it's just been lots of good synergy and energy. So thank you for doing that. I want to ask you a question to kind of help the audience get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
How did you get started in the credit union industry?
Oh my goodness. That's a long story, but I'm going to try and make it short. So I started in the banking industry right out of high school and was a part-time teller, then became a full-time teller, then went to the platform for new accounts. And then I found the world of credit unions. I started in accounting, of all things.
Oh, wow.
I was a GL reconciliator at Santel Federal Credit Union, which was a formerly telephone employees credit union, but now it's merged and grown so significant. I spent 6 years there and learned to be card services expert and ACH and credit cards. And from there, I became a card services manager, then a contact center manager. So I have grown up in the credit union world, but I learned later in life, I was better with members. I was very extrovert, but I could actually focus on detail and also be very organized. So it was a unique opportunity. But I've ended my career in the front line, being a branch manager and then a VP over branches, and now Chief Member Experience Officer. So I've had the pleasure of really learning and growing in the credit union industry. And I believe very strongly in the credit union. I think it's a movement. I think it's a cooperative environment that's just one to be protected. I very much love the credit union industry.
It absolutely is a movement. Couldn't agree more with you on that. You have had experience in a lot of areas at financial institutions. I think that's one of the areas that makes you very unique to lead member experience, because as you know, every little part of the journey that a member has is unique. One of those is how they interact with team members at the credit union, and culture plays a big role in that. So the topic of today is command and control leadership. Let's start by first defining that for people. What is that type of leadership?
So I'm no spring chicken. And so when I started in financial services, it was the mid 80s. And in that time, it was very much command and control. You did as you were told. And if you didn't do as you were told, you were written up and held highly accountable. And so work ethics were different in that time. But since then, I think the world has evolved and changed. And if you think about, I think of Simon Sinek. He talks all the time about youth and how our young professionals today have a completely different mindset. They're just different. They are still extremely valuable. It just is forcing us, the older generation, to, I think, evolve our mindset and our abilities to inspire, to communicate, to get the attention of the young professionals. So telling someone what to do and then expecting someone to do it today does not work. The young generation, as smart as they are correct. They deserve to know why. They deserve to be valued and respected, and they have to feel heard. If you can accomplish those things, make sure your team members and employees feel heard, they know they're valued, and if they can understand the why, not only will they meet your expectations, they'll exceed them.
You kind of incorporated this a little bit, but I also would love for you to tell, why are you really passionate about this being old news, that type of leadership being old news?
That's a wonderful question. So having the great opportunity to work at 5 different credit unions and in all different states of the nation, I've seen so much change. No one credit union is alike. No one CEO is alike. No one culture is alike. But for most of the areas that I've stepped into and had the pleasure of stepping into, I've usually replaced a leader that was command and control, some more than others. But what that has led to is me inheriting staff or teams that are not empowered, don't make decisions for themselves, may not think for themselves, and wait to be told. So when you think about the success of any organization, does that really help an organization be successful when you have a group of amazing professionals that have strong education and backgrounds and expertise, but they're not allowed to use their thought process or their own judgment? That is not healthy for any organization. So as I've stepped into these new roles that I've had, I've been at A+ since August of 2020, and I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to be working in an organization with a culture like this. So I chose them very specifically. They're progressive, they have authentic leadership, there's no egos, and that is so rare to find, right? But one of my main focuses when I've gone to the last, I would say at least 3 credit unions, is how do I empower my staff? And I usually have about almost half the organization reporting to me because I oversee branches, contact center, frontline teams, as well as a couple of back office teams. So I always have a big chore. I have a big responsibility, and I feel like I take that responsibility very seriously. But my first year or two is always spent on connecting with every team member. I respect everyone. Doesn't matter their title, doesn't matter their pay, doesn't matter what position they have. If you're breathing and you're a human, you're going to get my utmost attention and respect. And let's be honest, that's inconvenient and exhausting. So if you don't have the energy and the passion or the belief behind making sure every person feels valued, it's probably not something that comes easy to you, but I can say everyone can learn it. So as I'm taking these teams and they are all of a sudden, people are saying, well, what do you think? What would you like to see? How would you like to see that happen? And when we create a team of leaders that takes the time to understand the value of why, and they feel empowered, it is amazing to see what happens in productivity, in sales goals, in leadership development, in employee promotions. It's extraordinary.
So I want to come back to why you chose A+. What stood out most specifically about the CEO there, right? Because you report directly into the CEO, so that's your leader. So what stood out most to convince you that A+ was the right place?
He was the one that convinced me. It's a very good question. What a great question, because think about it. The way that I approached where I would work next, because I did have options. I got my education later in life in my 40s, which is unusual. I had the experience under my belt, but I got my bachelor's at 44 and my master's at 46, and they're in management and organizational leadership. It's amazing what happens to you when you get those credentials behind you or on your resume and behind your name. Headhunters just kind of went wackadoodle. I've had many remarkable opportunities, and I'm so grateful and thankful for that. But when I was courting A+, I had 2 other great opportunities. But I had a list of what I wanted. I wanted to work for a progressive organization. I wanted to work where there were no egos, where people weren't easily offended. Because when you have an ego, it's easy to misinterpret someone's statement or actions and think they have hidden agendas or assume negative intent. It is so important to not place yourself in a place like that if you're someone that has positive intentions. So that was a requirement. I wanted to be authentic and be myself and not be criticized for who I am. I don't think I'm perfect. I know I'm not. And I have refused to sign perfection clause in every organization I've gone. But I think we all can be imperfect and we all make mistakes. My CEO, Eric Case, who came from Wisconsin, and he worked at Landmark Credit Union. He was the COO there. He is probably one of the most authentic, real, humble, strong leaders I've known. For me to say that, that's a lot. But what caught my attention was his authenticity, his real approach, and he has no ego. He is probably one of the most collaborative CEOs I've known. He can make decisions on his own and then inform the C-level. He doesn't. He brings us together, and think about leadership. I said a minute ago is inconvenient. He is living that life. He will take the time to bring us in. And if we can't all get together at one moment, he'll do it in 2 meetings and discuss it with us. And he wants to make sure he hears us. I have never felt more heard and valued than working at A+ for Eric Case. And I think that matters as an employee.
I think it does too. So what do you think are the biggest differences between the controlling style and what you do now? Because I mean, we've kind of been hearing a little bit about it. I think it's autonomy. I think it's freedom to think. I think it's being able to feel valued. I think all of those are differences, but if you had to layer it into one or two, what are the top two?
So I think command and control is do as I say, not as I do, and do as you're told. And I think that modern leadership inspires. And while I can't motivate people, I can create a safe environment for my leaders to be themselves. And if they can feel safe, at the end of the day, the differences are the ability to run your business. And that's probably the sentence I say to my direct reports more often. Run your business. You make the decision, run your business. What do you want to do?
So you've come in here, A Plus has already got this established culture that we've talked about. Obviously, that your leader is leading by example. So what's been your experience over the last little while as far as success goes and the adoption of a more agile leadership like this?
I so wish you could talk to my direct reports. So maybe you will one day.
You mentioned a few of them, right? Like better, the sales team is doing better. Like you have autonomy across functions. What are some other successes?
I'm going to talk about two remarkable leaders I have overseeing branches. It's like they were thirsty and were parched. And since I've arrived, they are happy. They are strategizing. They are running their business. They are solving problems. They are developing their employees. And it's as if my whole focus has been to remove obstacles and barriers and just bring them tools and resources. They are remarkable. They impress me every day. They will tell me directly in more than one way that it's so refreshing to work for a manager that has their back. And I think that's it. And it's simplest forms. It's, do you have my back or not? Am I safe to make decisions? Am I safe to do my job? Or is that going to come back to bite me? At the end of the day, I think in essence, James, that's what it is.
You've got to allow freedom to fail and be okay with failure for learning moments and growth. And I think that so oftentimes failure becomes like this big like burden on people's shoulders where they're trying to do everything they can to not make a mistake. And I tell this to my team all the time where I'm like, look, I would rather you go out and try something and it not work than you have not tried at all. I don't ever want people to feel like they can't try things. That's where you find the diamonds in the rough.
Yes.
When you try things that you traditionally maybe don't feel comfortable trying or you're outside the box, I think all of that translates really, really well to what you're talking about.
Yeah. And think about it. When we were kids and we learned to walk, didn't we fall?
Yeah.
So it's called Failing Forward, right? That's a novel. That's a novel. It's a book by John Maxwell, and it's about failing forward. It's not if you'll fail, it's when.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've convinced my team, fail often, but fail forward. And I got you. It's going to be all right. We're going to figure it out. What can you possibly break? What can you possibly break by trying something with good intentions and it not working? Just figure it out.
I couldn't agree more. So what has been your experience working in several states? There's obviously a big difference with culture across states. I want to double down on this because I do think this is important, especially with how hot like topics like DEI and other things are right now. One approach is not always going to solve that, right? So I think that you bring in some perspective on what you've seen and heard in your many different roles.
So I have some great stories to share. So when I went from working in Los Angeles County and I moved to Philadelphia, and the culture there, if you've ever been to Philadelphia, is a little different in California. So the CEO, when he would greet people, his first words were cussing, and it was said in such a way that almost made it light. And I remember my shock and horror as I first saw that, because in California, I mean, we all know it's one of the hardest places to have a business because the laws there are so just insane. It's the what is it? The lawsuit capital of the world. You know, I was Miss Prim Proper and professional, and going to Philadelphia, that was a culture shock. I was there 2 years and finished my master's there. And then the headhunters called and I moved to central Pennsylvania we went from a $1.5 billion credit union to a $4 billion credit union. And I was the senior vice president of retail. So pretty much the same position, but just different title. In that environment, I remember sitting down with my boss, and he was the EVP. Larger credit union, they have different structure, but I remember talking to him about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I had been to the community events because I've always been involved heavily with the community, and they were talking about DEI. And I came back and talked with him. And after 1 hour of his lecture, I walked out of there realizing, oh, I will never bring that topic up again. So I am fortunate. I am Latina. I speak fluent Spanish, but I don't look it. I don't know why. It's been an Achilles heel for me my whole life because I want to look like your family, right? But apparently, I pulled from some genes of the Spaniard, and I'm tall and I have fair skin. But in that environment, it served me, which is really not okay, right? Because why should we be judged by our ethnicity? So let's fast forward to today. I am one of the executives on our DEI committee and work groups. It is so remarkable to see the differences. Pennsylvania, if I think about it, now central Pennsylvania, that's where they have the Amish, right? They're little horse and buggies, and I used to go buy their food and their wood, beautiful furniture. But it's a gentleman's club there. It's a different world. You stepped into a different world. And then coming here to Austin, Texas, your ethnicity, background, female, male, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't have any bearing. You're a professional and you're treated as such. And how can that not be refreshing?
Yeah, I think it's so true, though. For the longest time where I live, Utah has gotten a bad rap on this, right? Like they're not as progressive. And I think that we've seen a big shift happen just over the last, I would say, 2 years where it's gotten a lot better, and I think that there's baby steps for sure, but it is very interesting how no matter where you're at as a listener listening to this, approaching tough subjects like culture at an organization, you've got to look at your environment and the one that you're around and decide what's best for you ultimately, because you're not going to have like this direct translation that's happening at some others. And unfortunately, we want everybody to get there, but it takes time, I think. And I think that's the key. So I have a couple more questions for you. What can credit unions do to change if they have a command and control leadership?
So that's a tough one because I worked in them. I think that there's times that you will have a CEO and the executive team not be aware that they're command and control. There's a couple of credit unions I think of where they really believe they were progressive. But if you look a little deeper, the cultures are different. One of them that I'm thinking about, I've never actually been in an organization until this one, which I will not name, but I'd never really seen a culture of fear. And when I got into this organization, I was so surprised at what I was seeing. And as I spent more time acclimating and trying to understand, because you have to enter an organization gently, you gotta spend time listening, seeking to understand, asking a lot of questions. What's the history? I learned that there was a couple of projects that happened a year or two before I got there, and they went terribly, terribly wrong. That had a negative impact on the membership, which really came back and hurt the credit union and the organization and the board, right? And that makes sense. When you impact the members in a negative way, that's pretty natural that they're not be happy with that. But they didn't let go of anyone. And what that did was created such backlash, and all team members walked around on eggshells, concerned that if they made one mistake, they'd be terminated, which is so strange when you think about it, because the opposite was happening.
Yeah.
So I've seen credit unions where they're not executing with excellence, and they might have reasons why, but isn't our job as leaders to remove obstacles and barriers and bring in tools and resources, but also the right caliber of employee? So I think when you have a group that might be command and control, number one, are they aware of it? They may not. And be careful who the messenger is there. If they're not ready to hear it, if they're not ready to receive or be aware of it, I would caution anyone who's thinking they need to bring it to their attention. If you're not in a position to be respected and have value in your opinion, because it can come back. That's what I've seen. And actually, I left one of my credit unions because of that. I just realized it wasn't the right fit for me. I think you have to find your happy. So that, I think, because I was in an organization that the culture was off for me and it wasn't the right fit, I kept noticing that I wasn't able to stretch my wings and make any decisions. And that's the key. When you're a C-level and that's the situation, something's very wrong. But I noticed my light started to dim inside because I'm not command and control. And I'm not at my best if I'm micromanaged. And I noticed that I wasn't happy. And I realized, you know what? I believe in who I am. I think I need to take responsibility for myself. And I'm going to resign. We're in a financial situation where we'll be okay. And I know me, I'll find the right place. And sure enough, I purposely resigned. And 3 months later, I had 3 offers and I got to choose. I think that's a hard decision to make, but I don't think, James, that you can always bring that to someone's attention. I think they have to self-discover, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do think that it's something that can't be pushed. And it's a self-reflection moment. And I think that you can talk about it at a high level, I think, in a lot of cases, and it can help people self-reflect. But I do think it is one of those things that just has to be discovered on their own. So Michelle, we're at time. You've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I have a little bit of experience around the experience world. And there's always two places that people will start building really good member experiences. And when I was in the space, it was just called customer experience across the board because we didn't just necessarily serve credit unions, but culture and having top-down initiatives related to this has the biggest impact on the employee experience. And then the employee experience having the biggest impact on the member experience. And what I have seen through all of my experience and my whole life really is it's got to start at the top and it's got to spread across employees.
Yes.
And when you can create an environment where employees are having a good experience, they're having fun, they're enjoying their jobs, everything else from the member experience becomes much easier to do.
Yes.
Where can our audience reach Michelle Peterson?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. LinkedIn. I'm out there, Michelle Peterson. You can message me and I'll get back to you. I'd love to connect with anyone that wants to connect. It would be my pleasure.
Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. For all the listeners out there, please make sure to subscribe. Send me a topic of your choice. If you want to hear something unique on the podcast that you haven't heard yet before, reach me via LinkedIn as well. Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, James.